G'day guys, you asked for it, so here it is, a Scouting and Infiltrate Masterclass to honour the release of the new Goremongers kit from GW that has given the world eaters an absolutely amazing gift, which is an infiltrating unit. You're going to be able to use this to unlock your scout moves, and I'm going to show you how to do that in today's video. What we're going to do is we're going to break out some WTC terrain layouts, and we're going to show you very specifically where you can place your Goremongers to maximally capitalize on your 8 bounds Infiltrate and Scout combination. We're going to show you how to get turn 1 charges into almost every enemy depending on where they're going to position, and how to get maximal utility from these abilities. But before we get stuck into the video, I just wanted a quick shout out to my Etsy store where you can pick up a set of Goremongers today, so you don't have to split a battle box with the Sisters Battle Player, you don't have to wait for these to get released, you don't have to deal with scalpers on the internet. You can pick up a set from my Etsy store, 3D printed by myself, and it's also a great way that you can show your support for the channel, because obviously I make a little bit of profit off of those sales, which I can then turn into better equipment and better software and things like that to make sure that these videos are better. So it's a bit of a reciprocal relationship where you guys can support me so that I can continue to support you. So with that being said, let's just jump straight into the video.
Look for the Blood God.
Alrighty guys, we've got a few different deployment maps. I'll show you on this one first the basics of the way that these Infiltrate and Scout moves work. So I'm sure you're both familiar with these rules, so let's have a real quick recap. What Infiltrate allows you to do is it allows you to deploy your units anywhere on the table, provided that they are not within 9 inches of your opponent's deployment zone, or within 9 inches of enemy models, right? So that's Infiltrate. That means you basically can deploy anywhere down the guts here. You can deploy on these objectives in the middle, you can deploy behind this ruin here. It's a really, really powerful ability that allows you to get maximal utility from those units. And then Scout moves allows you to basically deploy in your own deployment zone, but then immediately before the first battle round, you basically are allowed to make a normal move of up to X inches. In our case, it's generally 6 inches, and that basically allows you to deploy, say, your 8 bound on the corner here, and then go, cool, before the game starts, I'm going to move forward 6, and then the game starts, and now it's my movement phase, so I'm going to move forward further and go in and do those turn 1 charges. So that's the way those two rules work. Now, Scout moves, you can't end a Scout move within 9 inches of enemy units. Infiltrates, you also can't set up within 9 inches of enemy units. So if both players have these abilities, it becomes very interesting. So what I'll do is I'll show you the scenario that we usually have to deal with as World Eaters players, and then I'll show you how big of an impact the Goremongers make to that scenario. So hypothetically, we're versing a Space Marines player. He's got a unit of 5 scouts. Scouts have Infiltrate, right? Now, let's say he wins the roll for deploying first, right? Generally what's going to happen is he's going to hold that scout unit to be the very last thing that he deploys. Because what he's going to do is he's going to wait to see where you deploy your 8 bound, and then he's going to counter deploy with his scouts, with Infiltrate up his scouts to block your scout move. So I'll give you an example here. Like, you deploy down here, you deploy some Berserkers, maybe you deploy Angron in behind here where he can't get shot. You know, you deploy along the line. You save your scout move guys to last. And the reason you generally want to do this is because they're the one that's going to be turn 1 striking your opponent. So you want to use them, you want to deploy them nearest to your opponent's threats. So let's say during deployment your opponent puts a Vindicator down here, and you're scared of the Vindicator because it's going to kill your 8 bound pretty effectively if it gets to shoot them. Right? So generally you're going to deploy your 8 bound something like this. And then the idea is that if you get the first turn, you can go, cool, scout moving up, then I'm going to move and advance, and then I'm going to charge that Vindicator, and I'm going to kill it before it gets an opportunity to strike me, right? And generally what happens there is, because you've got this massive threat range, your opponent's going to have to deploy the Vindicator back here. So that even with all of that, you can't charge the Vindicator turn 1. And then what happens is you go, okay, cool, I'm going into my first turn, so I'm just going to scout them, and then I'm going to move them up into this nook here, and now that Vindicator can't threaten me because it can't shoot me, and now if it stays where it is, I'm going to be able to go next turn, moving out, advancing, charging, and I'm going to hit it, right? So you're able to use your scout moves to get you right up into a nook, into a piece of terrain where you can't get shot, and then your opponent's now like, oh, do I move the Vindicator down this way now? and then if you've got another unit of 8 bound over here that's like scouted up here, moved into this nook here behind the wall, now next turn it can come out and it can hit the Vindicator. You can make it really, really hard for your opponent to protect their valuable pieces, right? However, if your opponent has scouts, this is where it becomes interesting. So you've deployed your 8 bound up the top here. They can deploy their Vindicator here comfortably, right? Because what they can then do is, after you've finished deploying all your stuff and they're finished deploying theirs, they drop their scouts, and they drop them here, which is 9 inches away from your 8 bound, 9 inches away from your deployment. And now, if you get that first turn, you actually can't scout forward, because you can't end your scout move within 9 inches of their scouts. Which means you could maybe scout sideways and stay within your own deployment zone, but chances are you've probably got a bunch of other units there, so you can't really do that, which means it basically just turns off your scout ability. And then, cool, you got first turn, you could just go, cool, I'm going to move up my 9 inches, be right in front of you, charge these guys and murder them, but you're not threatening that Vindicator, right? And you're not even really able to access this nook that you'd set up, because you've got this unit of scouts in front of you that you need to charge, and you can't get past them. You charge them, you can pile in over here somewhere, but perhaps that Vindicator can now move over here, and because you're on the ruin, they can shoot you. It can become a real nightmare. So that's what scouts do in your opponent's army, and by scouts, I should have picked a better unit example, because scouts have infiltrate, not scout, but let's call them infiltrators, that makes a lot more sense. So if those infiltrators go there, they can shut down your scout move and basically protect that Vindicator from your Alpha Strike and expose these 8 bound to damage from the Vindicator. So it's a really savage combo that can be really hard to get around as a World East player. So generally what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to deploy one unit of 8 bound here and one unit down here, so that your opponent's stretched thin. They can maybe use their infiltrators to block this, but they can't block that, unless they, of course, have 2 units of infiltrators, which a lot of people do. Eldari players often bring 2 units of striking scorpions for this exact reason. Dark Eldar bring mandrakes, Space Marines bring scouts or infiltrators. There's lots of armies that have those infiltrating units, which are really, really painful for the World Eaters player. Another quick note on scout moves, just as a side note, is that you don't always have to use them aggressively, and sometimes the best use of a scout move might be to deploy your 8 bound here, and then if you get first turn, you can send in and do what you want. But if you get second turn and your opponent gets their turn before you can scout back into this ruin out of line of sight. And that's really powerful, because if your opponent's got their Vindicator right here, if you deploy on the line like that, if you didn't have a scout move, they can just go, oh yeah, cool, they got first turn, they move their Vindicator up into here, and then they just blast you, and there's nothing you can do about it. So being able to scout defensively back into your own ruins is another really good use of them. But what I want to talk about now is the impact that Goremongers make on that entire scenario. It completely flips it on its head. Because, like I said, generally, you're going to deploy your scouts last, because if they deploy their Vindicator down here, you want your scouts down here. If they deploy their Vindicator up here, you want your scouting units, your 8 bound, up here, right? So basically, you're going to hold your scouting units to be the last thing that you deploy. They are going to hold their infiltrators to be the last thing that they deploy. And if they have more units than you, right, you're going to have to deploy your scouting units before they deploy their infiltrators, which means that wherever you put them, they can just put their infiltrators in front, right? So you're saving your scouts to last, they're saving their infiltrators to last. However, that math flips on its head if you also have infiltrators, because if you do that same agreement where it's like, cool, they're deploying their Vindicator here, they're holding their infiltrators to block your scouts, but you have infiltrators, you just go, okay, my first drop is infiltrators right here, right? My Goremongers go right here. And now, when your opponent goes to deploy their infiltrators, they can't deploy within 9 inches of yours, which means they can't deploy in here, because that's all within 9 inches. Where's the thingy? There it is. They can't deploy, because then they'd be within 9 inches of your either your deployment zone or your Goremongers. They can't deploy on this side, because, well, they'd be in their own deployment zone at that point. And importantly, they can't even deploy above you up here, because they would be within 9 inches. And basically, by doing that, you've basically blocked it off so that the closest that they could deploy is like down here, right? This whole area of the board they can't infiltrate into, which means they've deployed their Vindicator there, then you deploy your Goremongers here, and now you're free to just stack this side of the board, multiple units of 8-bound, Lord Invocatus, some Exalted 8-bound, some Berserkers, all the good shit up here, and now there's nothing they can do to stop you from scouting to here, moving to here, advancing to there, charging. Huge buff for the World Eaters. Huge. And then the other side to this buff that's really interesting is if they only have a single unit of infiltrators, right? And you have your unit as well, they now actually have to deploy their infiltrators first. Because otherwise you're going to do what I just described, where you use your infiltrators to prevent them from deploying theirs where they want. So they're essentially going to have to do the same trick to you. So they're going to deploy theirs something like this, so that, you know, that same 9-inch exclusion zone applies to you. Right? So they've deployed their infiltrators there. But now, because that's the first thing that they've dropped, and they've dropped it first in order to use their infiltrators to block your infiltrators, you can now just deploy all your 8-bound down here. And there's nothing they can do about it because they're out of infiltrators. And then your infiltrators can deploy either down here somewhere, like that, on this central objective here, or maybe you don't need to. Maybe you just deploy them in your deployment zone somewhere and hold a backfield objective, because basically just the presence of your infiltrator, if you have an infiltrator unit, you are automatically going to force your opponent to use their infiltrators first. And then you can just deploy something small, like a unit of 5 Berserkers up here, because you know that that's sufficient to deal with their infiltrator unit. And the bulk of your army can go down here, and then the bulk of your army can scout move along. So that's a very interesting way of viewing the dynamic between infiltrating and scouting units. So let's have a look at another map real quick. Let's have a look at this one here. So this one is, whatever it's called, Search and Destroy is the mission, is the deployment. So in this one, it can be a little bit harder, but it can also be a little bit easier depending on where your opponent deploys. So I'm just going to steal. Sorry, I just realized I didn't copy across all of the little units. So let's just chuck those there. Alright, cool. So say your opponent deploys their Vindicator on the corner here. If they want to block your scout moves, they're going to have to use their infiltrators something like this, right? Because they don't want you to go straight through the middle, and if they go further to one side, you can go around them. And if they go further to the other side, then you can go around them that way, right? So they put their scouts something like this. Your deployment is 9 inches to the center, so they can essentially place one of their models on the center and then sort of ring around. So if they've got their infiltrators there and their Vindicator there, and you've got your 8-bound here, you actually can still scout diagonally like this, so that you stay 9 inches away. Then it's your first turn, you move forward, you advance, and you charge, right? So one unit of infiltrators isn't really enough to block your charge on this deployment type, which means that your opponent is going to require 2. But even if they have 2, and even if they get the first drop, they deploy first one there, then you just deploy your Goremongers over here so that they're 9 inches away from your opponent. And now they can't put any more over here, which means you're free to do exactly what we just did. Deploy right here, scout that way, charge through. There's nothing they can do about it. So just having that one unit of Goremongers completely unlocks that. Whereas if you didn't have that unit of Goremongers, they're just going to go, cool, the first unit is going to go here, right? And then the second unit that they deploy is going to go down here, like so. And now they've got that whole area screen. And now these 8-bound, if they were down here, they actually can't even, they have to go all the way around. They're never going to get that Vindicator. So that's the power of the Goremongers. So pretty much every deployment, what you're going to want to do with the Goremongers is you're going to want to deploy them in the center, stretched out as far as possible. You've probably noticed the interesting little dogbone style formation that I've got here. That's just because they all need to, because it's a unit of 8, they need to be within 2 inches of at least 2 models. So you've got like, you know, this guy's within 2 inches of these two, this guy's within 2 inches of those two, he's within 2 inches of those, he's within 2 inches of that guy and that guy, he's within 2 inches of that guy, he's within 2 inches of that guy, so on and so forth. So basically you can create a dog bone where as long as you have those anchors on each end, you're fine. This does make you super vulnerable to coherency during the game. Like if your opponent shoots and kills one model, all of a sudden you remove that one model, and now this guy is only within coherency of one model, but he has to be within 2, so you have to remove him as a casualty as well. So it does make you super vulnerable to stuff like that, but it serves the purpose of stretching this unit out as far as it can possibly be stretched. And the reason that you want to do that is because it makes for a maximal exclusion zone. If you had that clumped up as a little ball, it means that you're not stretched out as far, and therefore your opponent, you know, you're essentially with the infiltrators, you're projecting a 9-inch aura of enemy units can't be set up here, right? So you want to stretch your unit as thin and long as possible to make sure that that aura stretches out as far as possible, so that you've got the, you know, the 9-inch to there and there, which means that that whole area of the board, your opponent can't set up any of their infiltrators. And then if your opponent doesn't have infiltrators, right, then you don't need to use these guys for this purpose. And if your opponent doesn't have infiltrators, I would not be throwing this unit away cheaply, because it's very easy to kill, it's not tough, and it doesn't do a particularly large amount of damage. So in those cases, any unit that fits that sort of criteria, what you're going to want to do is use it for objective control. You're going to want to use it for actions, things like that. So what I would do is I would make sure that you're deploying it somewhere where it could, if needed, move on to the center to do establish locus or area denial. But also, if you've got more than one of them, you also want to make sure that you're putting it somewhere where it could go for containment or engage on all fronts. You know, you can use this unit to unlock a lot of secondaries that you would normally struggle with. Like engage on all fronts is often very hard to get early game, because you know you don't want to be sending 8-bound up into this corner. You know, you don't want to be sending fucking, because you want to be sending in and hitting your opponent. So being able to go, cool, well, I'm just going to have that one deployed up here behind this ruin, outside of my deployment zone, holding that objective. And now, if I get first turn, I'm going to be able to send my whole army in this way. I'm going to be able to send, you know, Angron's going to jump over into this corner, 8-bound are going to jump into that corner, I'm going to have some Jackals remaining in this corner, and my Goremongers are going to unlock that corner. That gets you your engage on all fronts. Or if you get containment, you're like, cool, well, I'm going to have a unit of Berserkers going to step out here, and they're going to contain this edge, and then the Goremongers are going to contain that top edge. You know, it really unlocks secondary play. So if your opponent doesn't have infiltrators, you want to use these guys to secure your objectives. If they do have infiltrators, you're going to want to use them to block their infiltrators. So I hope you guys found that video interesting. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff, and go over to my Etsy store and pick up a set of these Goremongers today so that you can start using these tricks that we've just discussed. And with that being said, I'm going to leave it here. Thanks for tuning in, guys. And if you would like to see a deep dive on any other strategies or anything like that, make sure to drop some comments below. I like hearing what you guys have to say and jumping in and providing you guys with that information. So with all that being said, let's end it here. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.
Are you tired of overkilling or underkilling enemy units? Tired of wasting time deciding how many attacks to allocate to achieve a desired outcome? And are you tired of complicated maths, calculating multiple weapon profiles with complex special rules? Well, thanks to today's sponsor, all of those problems are problems of the past. Adept Roll allows you to input the profile of your attacking units and the profile of the units they are attacking into to calculate expected results with precision. You can apply modifiers like Feel No Pain, -1 to hit, damage reduction, as well as enemy strats like Armor of Contempt to get precise results for what you expect your units to do on the tabletop. By rapidly simulating 1,000 rolls, Adept Roll will help you understand what your expected results are likely to be in any given tabletop situation. You can even save attacker or defender profiles to make data entry super fast and super simple, as well as importing them from various sources like Battlescribe or even screenshots from the Games Workshop app itself. So if you're looking to upskill, play like a pro, and stop making avoidable mistakes on the tabletop, download Adept Roll today and start playing with precision.